Those of you who just joined us, welcome. You are all muted to minimize the background noise. However, you have a couple of different functions on Zoom, and I think we all have sort of been already using Zoom. So I think we're pros at this point when it comes to using Zoom, but we have a chat box that you can use to ask questions, to communicate with us and with each other, to drop your thoughts, ideas, suggestions. We're here to learn from each other. And of course, you have the little hand, I think, raised. So you can always raise your hand as well, or drop it in the Q&A, whatever works for you. And yeah, so the session is being recorded. We can go ahead and get started. What do you think? Yeah, good. All right. So let's just set the scene for the day before we introduce ourselves. Kind of what are we here to do? So the traditional leadership models have been resilient for so many years. But as educational institutions become more dependent on agility and innovation, just as so many other corporations out there, this world requires a new type of leader. And the recent events that we've all have gone through as a society has made it even more evident that leaders, particularly in education and of course in other sectors, were not prepared to deal with the situation, right? We could not have predicted it. So during this webinar, we will deconstruct leadership through attitudes, beliefs, and skills necessary to thrive and generate optimal performance in this new world that we're in. A couple of things we're going to be looking at is a new leadership model. We're also going to look at psychological resources that we need to have as leaders to be able to be at our best, to perform at our best, as well as to help others around us thrive. We're also going to identify some effective motivations for learning. We're going to look a little bit on the brain science and give you some tips in terms of how do we increase emotional intelligence. But before we go into that, let us go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'll actually start with our guest today, Dr. Ronald Kovach, who serves as Executive Director of the American International Accreditation Association of Schools and Colleges, or AIAA, and big reason that we're all here today. So thank you for bringing us together. Throughout his career, he has served as both a chief academic affairs officer and as chief student affairs officer in various universities in the US. He's also internationally recognized as an expert in experiential learning. He has presented papers and workshops on every continent, worked with faculties worldwide, and has publications on experiential education and student retention. And finally, he has also been awarded over $3 million in grants, including a big chunk of that was from the US Department of Education for experiential learning. And he has served the National Society for Experiential Education as president, treasurer, and founding director of the International Experiential Education Academy. That was a lot of words. I felt like I started to mumble towards the end. So Dr. Ronald, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you with us. And to quickly introduce ourselves, and then I'll give a moment to Dr. Ronald to say a few words. So I myself, well, let's just start with Ivan. Ivan actually comes from tech and neuroscience background. He has 18 years of corporate experience as a marketeer with proven track record and passion for innovation and human development. He has hands-on experience in corporate transformation and people development. He was accountable for a global talent accelerator program that was aimed to transform an international corporation with more than 60,000 employees. He has co-founded 3 startups, 2 in technologies, and 1 in eco-clothing. He has lived in Switzerland, Peru, Spain, and the UAE. And a quick thing about myself, I actually come from background of higher education and learning. In recent years, transitioned towards corporate learning, yet education is sort of something that's been embedded in me. So I find myself going back towards that. So I'm really excited on a personal note to host the session. And I've been in the UAE for 7 years. I lived in Russia, United States, and the Middle East, and I've delivered sessions very similar to this in about 13 different countries. Face-to-face pre-COVID, and now digitally we do this globally. So And of course, between Yvonne and I, we like to write about these topics and speak on these topics, and we're quite recognized in our media presence in the Middle East, where our startup is based in Dubai, and we are taking part in various accelerator programs, which we're very proud of. And the most recent one that we're now part of is the biggest one in the world, which is Plug and Play. And that's been our very mini celebration that we had last week for that. So we're happy to share that news with you guys. I want to, Yvonne, if you want to say anything, otherwise I want to invite Dr. Ronald to say a few words. And again, just to give a welcome to our audience.
Dr. Ronald, please go ahead. We are very humble and impressed by your bio. This was a moment.
Well, you're very, very kind, Yvonne, and thank you, Elena. Just let me tell you very briefly about AIAASC, or AYA for short. We're an independent organization based in New York City. We have been working in educational services with schools for over 25 years, and recently started our higher education practice to complement our K through 12. We provide accreditation for schools internationally that offer an international education program through American-style curriculum and Common Core standards. We operate and accredit currently over 200 schools in 10 countries, and we are legitimate to operate based on the Ministry of Education in those countries to work in and train and accredit K through 12 schools. So I'm very pleased to represent AIAA, or AYA, in today's webinar, and nice to partner with Basern. Thank you, Elena and Yvonne.
Thank you to you.
All right, so let's, so you got to know us a little bit. So now it's our chance to get to know our audience a little bit. I think we have a question for them, Yvonne, right?
Yep.
All right, go ahead.
So what you need to do, we have a couple of questions for you just to get to know you a little bit more. You need to go to slido.com. Either you take the QR code and you take a picture with your mobile and you type the code that you see below, N143. And then there is going to be 3 questions that we would like to ask you for before we start. So these questions are completely anonymous, so don't be afraid about what you answer.
We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to submit their answers, and we can see who's submitting. We'll have the little counting right there. So just take a moment. If for those of you who are, I don't know, maybe joining from a phone, or if you're having any troubles logging in, you can also drop it to us in the chat. But if you are able to just scan or look it up on the web, we prefer that you submit it on the slido.com. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat and drop us questions as they will be coming in. So one of the questions, for example, is what do you do as your profession? And or where are you based as well? So you can drop some of those questions, some of those answers in the chat, or just use the Slido and answer the questions there. There you go. Give a couple of minutes. Great, we have some answers coming in. Okay, where's the rest of the people?
Yep. If you have any problems to log into slido.com, please let me know. You have the chat to communicate with us.
You can also drop us, where are you joining us from, in the chat. Where are you currently based? We have Kuwait. What about the rest of you? Abu Dhabi. Give it another minute because we have only 9 submissions and we have a lot more people online at the moment. So let's wait. So we have India, Turkey, Deba, Fujairah. All right. Should we show the answers, Ivan, from those who submitted it? Let's see. All right. So we have principal, teacher, CFO, academic coordinator. So a nice mix of people. I assume the rest of them is also quite similar to this. I think it covers different areas of education. We have somebody from the UK as well joining. Great.
So let's look at the second question.
So the second question we asked you, what if you could be an animal, what would you be? So Dr. Ibrahim, you just said you couldn't log into Slido, so you can drop it in the chat for us. If you feel brave enough to tell us in the chat, if you could be an animal, what kind of animal would you be?
I love this story with the Highland cow. Really,
what is a Highland cow? What's the difference between a cow and a Highland cow?
That's a good question. For me, it makes me think about Swiss cows in the mountains.
Okay. Dr. Abraham said bird as well. I'm guessing it has something to do with the freedom of the bird, or the ability to trust yourself as a bird and to just jump off. We have eagle, cat, dragon, lion. All right. And another thing we asked you, for those of you who weren't able to log into Slido, you can just drop us in the chat, is what is the one good thing that happened to you last week? And this was your answers. Somebody's mom's 60th birthday. My mom's 60th birthday is coming up in a couple of weeks. So I'm very excited about that. Enjoying the spring break. That's right. There was spring break. Yes. New puppy.
Something that is quite powerful is that when we look at things that matter for us, simple things like spending time with family, simple things like having some time with our kids, simple pleasures is something that it is quite important, especially when there is times of uncertainty. And that's like almost a trend, because we often ask the same question and always directed to family, close people, and times of relaxation.
Absolutely. All right.
And that leads us to discuss a little bit what has been happening during the last times, during this crisis, where a lot of things have changed in the world, and the way we perceive, in fact, what our priorities have changed drastically. One of the things that I wanted to discuss first is the fact that when people have been noticing, when we think about organizations, CEOs, managers, administrators of organizations in corporate or in higher education, there has been a trend that to notice that the lack of talent, the lack of readiness in order to cope with the changes due to COVID have been big, and we were not ready, in fact, to cope with these changes. There was, in early January this year, there was a study done by KPMG in order to assess from the perspective of leaders, what is the biggest threat, in fact, for the sustainability of their business. And the biggest threat today is the talent, the lack of talent. When they did the same survey pre-COVID, the lack of talent was number 11. What we noticed is that the leaders were not well equipped with the skills and the mental capacity, in fact, to cope with so much uncertainty, managing people remotely, managing also the connections that you have with your direct reports, with your teams, because most of them were working remotely. All of this, in fact, has been changed, and we cannot learn something that we in a training, something that it has to be built little by little. So there is three key things that have emerged out of this crisis that we have been living. This reshuffling of priorities is one: the sense of purpose, changes in terms of priorities, and the redefinition of prosperity. So what we are saying is that all of these changes have been driven by the fact that we were not equipped with the right tools. And if we think about it, how leadership has been, the evolution of leadership, in fact, of our times. So back in the days, it was about giving the opportunity to employees to say, if you do this, I will give you that. It's almost like buying the carrot and the stick, like something that you do good, you need to be rewarded. Something that you don't do good, you need to be penalized. So this approach has generated that when there is so much uncertainty, nobody had the possibility to have this inner motivation, what we call the intrinsic motivation, in order to drive purpose, in order to drive to continuously learn. And the other thing is that beyond skills, even though you can know the principles of good leadership, you can know dimensions or the competencies that are required to do to have a good level of leadership, you don't have the mental capacity when your brain, in fact, goes into a turmoil of changes. The brain is made in order to escape changes. Whenever there is changes, there is a flag coming up into our brain and telling us, hey, let's don't do that. It might be dangerous. And this is something that has been built for years and thousands of years, in fact, since humankind exists, in order to protect us. So changes it is a period of time for our brain in order to escape, to procrastinate. So the changes have been driving a lot of confusion in organizations, but also it has generated a new way of dealing with leadership. And this is what I would like to spend a little bit of time today. It is that leadership needs to be reinvented. And what I want to share with you is the model that we use, in fact, with our corporate customers or customers in education, about how we redefine the different dimensions of leadership in order not only to consider skills, but also the mental capacity that we need in order to activate these skills. Because if you are constantly bombarded with priorities, if you are constantly anxious about your future, you certainly don't have the capacity, the mental capacity to activate what you know. Let me drive you to the model. So the first step is that when you are a leader, you need to be able to first take care of yourself, to be equipped in order to then expand to the rest of your team. So thriving as an individual is key, in fact, for the success of a leader. The preparedness that we need to do, the practice that we need to do in order to thrive as an individual. When we are talking about connection, is our capacity to have open communication, participation, positive relationships, and a trust climate. It looks like something that everybody knows, but in order to have an open communication, you need to have the mental capacity. And this is something that is quite difficult in times of changes. So connection is something that you need to prepare within yourself. Self-awareness. When we are talking about self-awareness or awareness, in fact, we are talking about different dimensions that needs to prepare us as a toolbox. So we're talking about the possibility to have focus when an individual is able to focus for long periods of time without being distracted. It's very difficult when there is Zoom requests at any time. We need to have also the possibility to develop our flow, which measures the extent to which an individual becomes fully immersed in their work, kind of the artists, kind of the athletes before the preparation of into a big game, that they have this possibility just to focus on one thing, losing the track of time. Then we have the emergency of words that were not pronounced before because it was a little bit kind of shame to mention, hey, I'm doing mindfulness. But mindfulness, if we look at this from the psychological perspective, it just means to be reminded of doing something. And finally, the importance of emotional intelligence have risen quite a lot during this period. Elena, I think that you had a couple of things to say about these two elements that seems like a priority for us.
Absolutely. It's through the work that we've done with corporations and individuals from, whether they are fresh kind of juniors coming into the workforce or executives. One of the things that sort of sets somebody up for a successful career, whether especially in leadership roles, is that piece on emotional intelligence. And it's a topic that's been talked about quite a bit and it's become very popular, we know that. But that is really the part of being able to thrive as an individual, is to have that awareness about our emotional regulation, about our own sort of thought process, because we are we are creatures of habit. We're creatures of routine. And if we're not tracking and kind of being mindful and aware of the emotional triggers that we have, those things that upset us, it's very difficult for us to then be the example that our teams needed to be. So when it comes to just leadership development in general, emotional intelligence is the core of it all. And the biggest part of emotional intelligence, the first step, the base, is self-awareness. And that essentially, if I were to identify one kind of success factor of anybody that we work with or any kind of biography that you read out there, it's usually individuals that have strong emotional intelligence are those able to thrive. And another part about mindfulness, Yvonne, a lot of people think it's this, moment where you go into the woods, or I don't know, you're in some beach area and you're sitting down and you're meditating, and it's not that. Mindfulness can mean many different things. For some people, mindfulness is, I don't know, taking it out in a boxing class. For other people, mindfulness is just taking a moment every morning and saying a gratitude. For some people, it's having a nice cup of tea or coffee. It's just a pause. Mindfulness is a pause, is an opportunity to stop and reflect on whatever it might be happening with you at that moment. And as many generations previous to us always said, if you're able to conquer your mind, essentially, you're able to conquer it all, right? So, and that's what this aware piece gives us.
Exactly. So if we needed to redefine mindfulness, it would be how much we pay attention to the present moment rather than the past of the future events, how much we are focalized on what is going on right now, which we have a tendency that in the flow of work, so many demands, we don't do it. And it seems like a simple principle, a one principle thing in order to allocate the time to be mindful and to be focused on the present, but we simply don't have the capacity. Let me continue a little bit more about the dimension of agility, where there is key aspects that stick out. First of all, is the need the need of having resilience, of how we cope, in fact, with setbacks and unexpected events. Then we have the dimension of the growth mindset, where we need to be able to, as an individual, value learning and being challenged, value the experience, which is something that it looks quite difficult to do for us. The sense of control, which means that how the individual have the control on their lives and they can achieve all this expectation that we can achieve all what we want. And then there is the risk tolerance. It is the fact of accepting failure as part of the flow of work, accepting and not being afraid, and taking failure, in fact, as an opportunity, in fact, to learn something new. Now, from the actual practice, it seems difficult. And the reason why it seems difficult is because us as humans, we are always expecting like the big goal. Like we have an idea of how it should be if we become more resilient and growth mindset, or we have more growth mindset, sorry. The fact is that the brain doesn't like big changes. So you cannot expect one to learn that reading a book. You cannot expect that you are going to acquire this knowledge and you have it in your brain. Anything starts with practice, and the practice has to be as small as possible, because what is the most difficult is to start the practice. Imagine that every single dimension that we have mentioned, if you had the unit of practice, which is so small, so tiny, an action, a behavior that you start practicing in a recurrent manner, then this is a chance for the brain to collect this new action and embed it in the inside of the subconscious, which is 95% of our brain. And in order that becomes a reflex and is not perceived as change, because change is equal to fear, and fear is stress. And we usually start procrastinating and losing the motivation to move forward. There is, once we work as an individual, that is the moment where we need to expand and as a leader and start driving inspiration through our teams. And I want to discuss a little bit more about these three dimensions that belongs to the world of how do we inspire teams. First, there is alignment. In fact, that where we ensure that the leader shows the behaviors and there is an understanding with the team about the objectives that needs to be reached. Having the resources and that the team has the resources required, in fact, in order to thrive, in order to be successful. Problem solving, providing feedback to our people, and having the ability to nudge people, not to tell them as an order, do this, but to influence their people in order that there is the buy-in and that people has this sense of that they have contributed to the overall. And then I want to get back to a principle that is quite powerful. And I think it was the writer Dan Pink that mentioned that there are three things that makes people have an intrinsic motivation. So there is certainly the fact that they are capable of deciding how to do things, what he calls the mastery. There is certainly the sense of purpose, that when you are doing something, you are doing it for a bigger scope that goes beyond the financials of your organization, has a meaning for people in order to drive beyond, have the motivation to drive beyond what is required. And it's intrinsic, it doesn't cost anything, it's not about money. And it contradicts, in fact, the theory of the carrot and stick. So these are things that are quite powerful. And when we talk about inclusion, this is where, in fact, in order to bring back together a team, we talk about the sense of purpose. How do we engage? What is the level of energy? And by the level of energy, I'm talking about the how excited, how calm, how well the team is acquiring the positive energy rather than the energy that would be negative, like stress, being pushed beyond the limits, and the sense of calm. Last point that I wanted to discuss is about the team impact, which is about how do we drive as a leader the possibility to give them the autonomy by motivating, by helping them, in fact, to develop a team that is developed through coaching? How do we, in fact, embed a culture of recognition where it goes beyond the financial terms? And how do we encourage this ownership or accountability to our teams so that they do their best, the best they can? So leadership has become more complex and more human through this crisis that we have been living through. In fact, it seems that the place of the human has become stronger. There are three priorities for organizations today that they want to achieve. They want to have a place where they have purpose, a community, a culture that has purpose, that is meaningful and talks to the individuals. They want to accelerate the level of digitalization. But this time, digitalization is not anymore for replacing the human. It's to work around the human in order to unleash all the possibilities, all this creativity of the individual. And I think this is this model has been working. How do we use it? In fact, we use it in terms of opening the discussions at leadership level in terms of coaching, in order that they understand what is required behind these dimensions. There are actions, behaviors that need to be activated. And regardless that you are in education or you are already or you're working in a corporate, these are things that are about humans. This time, the leadership model is built around humans. And then we need to move to the next slide.
Yep.
Time for action.
Yeah, so we just wanted to give you a quick takeaway. So being mindful that this is quite a short webinar, but we want you to walk away with some actionable items. And this is what we promised you in the beginning. And we said we're going to introduce you to the leadership model, which is what we did. And now we want to give you a couple of actions that might be very applicable to you as an individual. And then we want to bring in Dr. Ronald into the conversation as well. So a quick couple of things here. So if you are, we talked a little bit about growth mindset, and growth mindset, essentially, it's just that belief that we can do better, the belief that we can improve, the belief that we can learn and expand. It really goes down to our brain plasticity, brain elasticity, where we're able to kind of expand our mindset, right? And to help you practice that, some of the things that you can do is envision the best. And it sounds very simple, right? Because we always talk about thinking positive and all that, and it's not quite that. It's more of just looking and finding opportunities and challenges, right? Looking at different perspectives, looking at how can you gain something from this particular challenge, how can you turn it around to work for you, right? That's one aspect of it. Another part is, a bigger part of this is auditing your thoughts. So whatever challenge you're going through, asking yourself, am I focusing on the problem or am I focusing on finding a solution? All of these different things are pieces of growth mindset. Not seeking perfection is another big one. And for those of you who are very kind of perfection and wanting to make everything perfect, I'm with you. But at the end of the day, it's more about progress. So progress over perfection. And also this ties into avoidance, because when we look for things to be absolutely perfect, we tend to avoid certain situations, because unless it's 130% perfect, we just don't even get involved. And that's not implementing a growth mindset. A couple of things on resilience. Resilience, we all have different levels of it. I think we've all increased our levels of resilience over the last year and some change. But it's really just, at the end of the day, facing uncomfortable situations. It's having difficult conversations that you might have been avoiding, but you need to have. So I encourage you, if there is a situation like that, go ahead and face it this week, put it in your calendar, make it happen. learning something new, because when we learn something new, we get uncomfortable, and when we get uncomfortable, we can then deal with that uncomfortable feeling, and then by that we're training our brain to be more resilient. So the more uncomfortable situations we face, the more we overcome that feeling of discomfort or fear, the more resilient we become. And if you reflect on your previous experiences, you will know that you've been pretty resilient. And again, I think after this past year, we can definitely say that we all have been pretty resilient. Mindfulness is something we already touched based on, but just to summarize it and add a few extra points, is really just that basic human ability to be fully present, to be aware of where we are and what we're doing, and not being overwhelmed by what's going on. When we become mindful, we tune in into our own thoughts, right, which very nicely connects with growth mindset and that audit process. We're able to recognize, is it that everything is just, challenging and difficult, or is it just this particular area that I'm in currently, this particular moment in time is what's challenging, and what is really the worst case scenario there, right? Or what is it costing me if I'm not making this particular, if I'm not overcoming this particular challenge? So by being mindful, we're more aware of what is really happening in our own kind of environment, as well internally and externally, right? And one thing you can find here is that just, there's a lot of talk as well about multitasking, and it simply doesn't work. Our brain is not designed to be multitasking. No matter how great you are at multitasking, the chances are you're not doing quality work when you're multitasking. So be a single tasker. That is one way to practice mindfulness. You can also, of course, keep your own sort of form of meditation, which I've mentioned. It could be going boxing, it could be, I don't know, yoga, it could be having a tea, it could be talking to a friend. And keeping technology time in check as well is another way to be mindful. Be mindful if you're always antsy and wanting to check your phone, right? So stop yourself from doing that. And finally, any type of moving, breathing, spending time with nature, all of those things will help us rebalance essentially our nervous system. And the final piece here as well is the emotional intelligence. And one thing I just want you to take away from that is that, first of all, it's such a huge topic, and I'm not going to pretend to even get you to sort of start learning about it now. But if I were to recommend just one thing that you can focus on, is that self-awareness piece that I mentioned. And you do this by pausing. But what do I mean by that? Next time you have an emotion that is arising, whether it's anger, sadness, joy, whatever it may be, pause and reflect on it. Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? What is causing it? And what do you feel is the next reaction that you're going to experience? I know it sounds difficult because you literally have to pause and pay attention to your thoughts, but I guarantee if you do that, you can potentially prevent yourself from doing and saying and asking things that might not add benefit to that particular situation. And if that doesn't work, take a moment and fast forward of, if you are to respond in this particular way, what is the chain of reactions that could potentially happen as a result of you acting up on your emotions? And those could be good and bad as well. So that's that. I'm mindful. We've been talking for a little bit longer than we wanted to. And I really want to bring in Dr. Ronald now, and just to loop him into the conversation. Dr. Ronald, welcome yet again. Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne and Elena. I think what's important as the takeaway here is, people may say, I don't have time to do this. And I think you do have to ask yourself the question, you don't have time to manage your life, or you don't have time to show care to others. When you ask yourself that question, I think your mindset changes. We all have a particular area of expertise, our discipline, our subject matter, whatever our skills are. And you don't just achieve that and then stop. And 15, 20, 30 years ago, you mastered your skills and your subject area, your discipline. You didn't stop, you had to continuously learn. So I think the takeaway here is, being an effective person is essential and the foundation of being an effective leader. So the reflection that speaks volumes to my work in research and in education for experiential learning. The main pillar is reflection. We all know friends who continuously make the same personal mistakes in their lives. And it's mainly because they say, well, I don't know why I keep drawing negative, toxic people. Well, you need to be reflecting on why you keep drawing and associating with negative, toxic people. That only comes from reflection, from learning, or else you repeat the same mistakes. Leadership is not authority. Leadership is managing effectively one's own life. And it's important to communicate in this session or any other session that leadership doesn't have to mean you're in a position of authority. It's how you make a contribution to the community in which you are operating. And it's important to make sure that you reflect upon these things, because continuous improvement is a term we think of organizationally. But continuous improvement is really the personal aspect of what you're hearing today about mindfulness and about reflection and about emotional intelligence. You can't be teaching your subject matter, if you're a teacher, the same way that you did 20 years ago, because the field or the pedagogies have changed. So too are your personal responsibilities. That reflection means that being a leader is something that you work on continuously. It is a journey. There's no destination. The destination is the journey. So I think what's important as far as this is concerned is, in my experience in developing leadership programs, it's, the mantra is this: it's never about you. It's always about other people. It's about serving others, and the benefits that you receive without expecting them come about when you release the ego and understand that it's leadership beyond the ego. So I'll leave you with a thought of something that you can do to look into transpersonal leadership. And that is the type of leadership that goes beyond the individual. It talks about some of these things. It's a leadership theory that's about 10 years old, and it's a book called Leading Beyond the Ego. And once you can understand that it is about others and it is about developing the talents of others, that's what leadership really is. So a leader is someone that develops the talents in other people, that acknowledges that talent and honors it. And I think that's very important, that to put yourself to the side, because it really is not about you in the organization. It's not about you not listening to what others are saying because you're more concerned with getting your point across, but rather it's listening and doing the reflection. So reflection as a personal management, as a leadership management style, is certainly something that we all have to work on. And I think that's the key. Leadership is something that you have to do all the time. It's not a webinar, it's not a program, it's not a degree. It's something that is really about self-development and therefore the development of others.
Dr. Ronald, while you were talking, in fact, I was wondering that if the journey, in fact, for a true leader starts by allocating some time for this self-awareness, to develop this self-awareness, which is the starting point. So if I don't know myself enough, I don't know my strengths, I don't know when I can be more productive, I don't know how to read the signals, if I am mentally, I have the mental capacity to do my job or to control my job. So, and as a trend, I have seen also, and which is quite impressive, a lot of males, which wasn't the case a couple of years ago, starting the journaling, writing down what the feelings of today, what they learned yesterday, what they would like to do, to capture, in fact, information about where they stand, it has played a very positive role, in fact, in that, to start by knowing ourselves and getting the data to validate where we are today. What do you think about that, Ronald?
Yes, that personal reflection is part of managing your life. And if you are in a position of responsibility, helping develop that of others. And so in experiential education, as I mentioned before, reflection is certainly the key. It's learning how to apply what you've learned. So experiential education or learning is about applying what you've learned. And so these concepts that both of you described and touched on briefly today is about taking that and applying it in your work life, in your personal life as well. There should not be a disconnect between who you are at work or at school and who you are at home. And I think that sometimes that causes cognitive dissonance and psychological issues because you think you have to be someone that you're not in order to lead, where the opposite is actually true. It's being authentic, and it's understanding consistency in your life because of the continuous improvement modality that you buy into.
It looks to me like there is, in order to change behavior, so as you mentioned, so we need to have self-reflection because we need to know where we are, who we are. Secondly, action. Otherwise, there is no change of behavior. And the third thing is about making it as much as possible easy to start. So to start with micro actions, to start with little steps instead of just believing that we can change from one day to the other. How do we make we reduce the friction for the change so that we can start rolling and going, starting the movement towards the change of behavior? Three things that looks quite a priority today.
I also would like to invite the audience at this point also to throw your thoughts. What do you guys think about the topic so far? Your questions, so use the chat box. And while you guys are dropping your questions, I'm also curious if, with the rise of technology, how do you think, what are some things we need to watch out for in the world of education? How are we going to adapt as educational leaders, as institutions? Just curious to hear your thoughts from both of you guys on this. Ivan, if you want to, you can mention a few things.
I personally don't believe, like with the rise of technology, that professors, people who are providing others, equipping others with with knowledge, practice, experiences, that can be replaced with software. I personally think that, as we mentioned, that behind the learning, there is the scope of changing behaviors, influencing others. And in order to do that, it's not just about knowledge. Knowledge can be done through a software, but the driving this experiential way of learning, benefiting from experience from others, having this empathy to nudge people to do the action, only humans can do it. So if there is any time the fear that I'm going to lose my job, or our training ed tech, we're going to lose it because we're going to be replaced by learning management systems, I don't think that it will happen.
Dr. Ronald, what do you think?
Yes. Just to echo what Ivan said, the experience that we've all had in the last year is one of the more major paradigm shifts in human history. The entire world has been engaged in rethinking how learning occurs. And we've all had to shift. Not that we didn't have online learning in the past, but now it was all over the world. And so if anything that we can take away is that the interpersonal relationships of what a leader does, or a person in a community, in an organization does, is even more amplified, because organizations that didn't have this kind of interpersonal connection, that didn't have people leading or participating who had this emotional intelligence and mindfulness, how is that going to translate into an online environment where there's less person-to-person interaction? yes, you can have person-to-person interaction online, but if you didn't have those relationships before, I would think that it was really difficult to lead people if you're in a position of responsibility when you are distanced from individuals. So if anything, it has brought, I think, full circle to the fact of the things that you've heard, participants that you've heard today are even more important. As far as education is concerned, hopefully the silver lining is that we've moved beyond the sage on the stage, that the teacher, the professor, is the person through which all knowledge flows. But the shift is that we have to teach, and we have been teaching in effective ways, students to learn how to learn, that they can be self-directed learners, because fortunately they've had to in this environment. They can't just sit in front of a computer for 7 hours a day, but rather those effective teaching strategies that we have seen in our K through 12 practice and in higher education. It's been those institutions, those organizations who have directed students of how to learn and then come back together to share. So I think that what's important is teaching students how to learn. That's the lifelong skill. That's really the whole purpose of education. The difference between knowledge and knowing how to learn, how to identify, how to differentiate valid learning opportunities from ones that are not very legitimate. I think that that's extremely important.
We have a question from Ahmed, who asked, would we be sticking to this type of education during the pandemic, even when it's over? Would it be leading education? So I guess looking at future of education, essentially post-pandemic, what is that going to look like, if I understand correctly? So that's, are we going to keep applying these sort of things that we're doing right now, or basically what is the future of education looks like? Who wants to take that one? Anybody?
In my view, I think the worst mistake international education and leaders could have is to go back to, again, the term the sage on the stage. Students will be rebellious and they'll shut down if they have to go back to what was. I'm not saying that in all schools that's how it was, but the integration of technology, and again, taking the skills that have been developed, hopefully, of students understanding how to acquire learning, how to acquire knowledge, how to learn, using technology. Those are the tools. It is as if we taught people how to farm, and then we took away all their tools and their implements. And then we said, okay, grow. Could they grow something? Well, there may be some leftover seeds that will fly through the air and things might grow, but it's not sustainable. So the worst thing we can do, I think, is to go back to it, as opposed to, again, capitalizing on the paradigm shift and making sure that we integrate what we have learned with the use of technology over the last year, and change education to focus more on equipping students with the skills and the tools to be self-directed as learners. And what a wonderful classroom that is when students come in, not just doing what you've asked them to do, but exploring above and beyond what you've asked them to do, because they've learned and they get excited about it, because they're not just passive receivers, they're active participants.
Elena, from the perspective of a father who I see my kids in front of the computer, and I see how creative teachers have become in order to find ways to engage with the students and to make them do homework post the class. And because I don't think that there has been an organized way to tell them this is the methodology, go and do it. I think that individuals have thrived with the innovation, with this spirit of innovation, have tried to find ways to keep these kids engaged. And it is quite amazing how resilient they have been through this period. And I see also that these innovators inside of education have spread a little bit the words, influence others, and then you see the teachers who were a little bit more traditional being influenced by this new type of teachers. That was impressive.
Good point.
I have to agree with both of you. Absolutely. I don't foresee that we're going to go back to the way things were. I think that, if anything, the higher education in particular space is going to see more and more disruption as we move forward for various reasons, just simply alone because of the changing dynamics of the work space. So I think that it's going to come to a point where higher education institutions and just educational institutions are going to have to adjust, and the world of work has significantly sped up as a result of last year, which is going to then kind of have the ripple effect down to the education system. And I think it's going to see even more disruption in the next coming 3 to 5 years. Which is, because it's all connected at the end of the day. We have one more question from Dr. Ibrahim. Does leadership have different styles?
I can start just saying, so there has been an evolution of leadership. That's a principle that has come because the needs of human beings have gone into evolution. We are inspiring to a higher purpose. We don't have anymore to care, for most of us, about surviving, about wars, and now we are thinking about how can we unleash our potential, be fulfilled by a higher purpose. So that has made that the evolution of leadership had to be adapted to this human-centric approach. This is number one. Secondly, there is no one type of leadership because it has become more individualized. The things that I do with, or that a leader does with one person, cannot be the same type of leadership with another person, because they are at a different stage of readiness. There is the trust that has been built, or the connection with people the level is different. So you need to adapt. It becomes what people call situational leadership, according to the situation and the personality of the individual. So there is different type of styles, and it's not a single rule that can be applied to the masses. It has to be individualized to the person in front of you.
You know, as someone once said, leadership is a toolbox. So this concept of situational leadership rings true because it's not one size fits all. The leader has to have the kind of understanding that continuous learning as a leader provides you with the opportunity to interact with people, to find their talent at their level. And every person can't be a cookie cutter where it's all exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the idea of now having some virtual employees, let's assume everything goes back to normal in an organization, you will have virtual employees as well as people that will be face-to-face. I think organizations have learned they could actually have people working remotely, whereas many organizations thought that was not possible. They have survived and they have thrived. So what Yvonne said about situational leadership will always ring true, that you have to always have the right tools in your toolbox to deal with individuals. And that's where the interpersonal comes in. Leadership is not easy. And that's why there are so few really great leaders, because it's not an easy thing to master, but it has to be worked on. And it is a craft. It's not inherent, and there's no leadership gene. You have to learn it, and you have to practice it experientially.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that answers the question. I think we have one more question. What are the useful ways in coping with the new normal education? What are the useful ways in coping with the new normal? So I guess part of that is also just kind of coping with change, perhaps. So what is the useful ways? Ivan, maybe that's for you. What are some useful ways to cope with this new way of work, I guess?
Listen, I wouldn't, we are all waiting for solutions that can make us feel a little bit more in a human environment. Like today, for instance, we have a Zoom discussion, and God knows how difficult it is to have a Zoom discussion when we have to pay attention about how do I look in front of the camera, how do I pay attention to all of the signals from Ronald, Elena, and the chat. So we are in the process of waiting for technological solutions that are going to be more around how we humans react. This is a critical point of the situation. Can you repeat again the question, please, so that I am sure that I have understood it correctly?
So the question was, how do we cope? How do we cope with the change? I don't see it anymore, actually. But what are the what are the useful ways in coping with the new normal? That's what it was. Yeah.
And the second point, so having the right tools that are coming, in fact, that mime a little bit more the natural way of interaction with people is going to be number one. The second point I would say that we have highlighted several times. So the rise of this growth mindset, and its growth mindset, it has nothing to do with reading more books or having more degrees. Growth mindset is this ability to experience something, to experiment with ourselves regularly, because we have the ambition to acquire more, to be more fulfilled with more knowledge. And that in education is quite helpful because we can learn from different areas. Right now, the educational model is a little bit more, maybe more rigid than the corporate world. So do we have the ambition to go and learn what the corporate world is doing? Do we have the ambition to have the perspective from a psychologist in terms of how to interact in this new way? Can we learn from other communities beyond our simple community of educators? And that's the growth mindset. Just having the possibility to ask questions to others about how do you deal with that. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on the topic.
Great. So we hope that answers your questions. I think that was the last one. I'm also mindful of the time. I want to take this moment to just again thank you, Dr. Ronald, and to AIAA for making this happen. We're really excited to collaborate on this with you guys. Yvonne, of course, thanks to you as well for being here. From our side, that's it. I encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn. All three of us, you have our names right there. You should be able to see our names, so feel free to connect with us. You have emails as well. You can always reach out if you have any thoughts or further questions, or you just want to have a chat about some of the topics that we discussed here today. Any final words from your side, you guys?
No, I just think continuous learning is for all of us. We are all students, no matter whether in an organization or a school. And I think that's, my final words for this evening.
After that sentence, I don't have anything to add, Elena. He said what I was thinking.
Well, thank you to our audience, and thank you so much for being here with us. Have a wonderful day ahead, evening ahead, whatever you have.
Thank you, Ronald. It was lovely to have you and to see you again.
Thank you both. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you
for everybody for attending. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks for attending.